Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you for yet another hour of power here on, I don't know, every podcast platform I can possibly get myself on. I'm sure if you are listening to this right now, well, you're connected. So also, of course, we have video on YouTube. All right, guys, this week I have special guest Janice Selbie. Hi, Janice.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Janice is, and let me read this so I make sure I get this right, is a Canadian registered professional counselor, and she specializes in religious trauma counseling. Yeah?
That's definitely my area of special interest because I have religious trauma syndrome myself, so I'm intimately acquainted with it.
Fair enough. I definitely am tracking on that. In fact, it's interesting talking with therapists, psychologists in this area or in this field of, the stuff we talk about, in terms of cult recovery or extremist groups or high control groups. So often we are also survivors of an experience.
Yes, yeah, definitely. It gave me motivation once I was able to extricate myself from the group and from all that thinking that went along with it. I was so motivated to figure out what just happened. How did I spend 40 years of my life believing so wholeheartedly these things that I believed? And then as I started researching cults and how cultic thinking works and happens, I started feeling sickeningly familiar and recognizing that I had definitely succumbed to some of those techniques as well.
Right. Yeah, they're tricky, crafty stuff, because once you start learning about this, so you see it all over. You see it all around, In fact, you might see it too much. I have seen that too, right? Even where it doesn't really exist. Because intent has a lot to do with it, and patterns of behavior have a lot to do with it, and everybody can have a bad day and screw up. But if you have a recurring pattern of behavior, then you're approaching the really nasty stuff that we don't like to experience. And that
so true. Yeah, and what I find is if I'm having or someone else is having a really visceral response to having their ideology threatened or their belief threatened, then we know that they are so deeply and firmly attached to it. Their identity is probably enmeshed with it, and there's no room for objectivity.
Exactly. And because then what happens, of course, is when you attack or criticize or comment on in any way negatively the subject matter, the thing that you're talking about, the person associates it with them. They can't help but take it personally, in other words,
Yes, for sure.
Good stuff. Well, let's go ahead and talk about a few things, because I wanted to, you are focusing on, as a counselor, on religious trauma, and not all cults or high control groups or extremist groups that I talk about are religions, but then again, a lot of them are. And so we can talk intelligently about internet cults and about non-religious cults, but I think we're going to focus today mostly on the religious side. And I think I'd like to also, just because I usually put my sort of conditionals or sort of, okay, here's what we're doing, here's what we're not doing today. I try to put that stuff at the top of the episode so people will understand what, from the get-go here, what we're trying to do. And the intent of this interview is not to bash religion as a topic. However, I think you and I will both agree that religion as a topic has been the cause, in many instances, of abusive behavior, traumatic behavior, even PTSD episodes, right? Things that leave people with PTSD, complex PTSD. So religion can bring this about, can bring about behavior that is abusive and traumatic. And would you agree with that?
Yes, I definitely would. And when we're talking in terms of religious trauma syndrome, um, it's a matter of the losses that you incur as a result of being part of a fundamentalist group. And then the losses, the double whammy, the losses you incur again upon leaving the group. And
Right.
suddenly you're no longer part of the community. But that's only just one of the losses there.
That's right.
And for sure, with religion, a lot of people are actually raised in it, born in it, raised in it, and it has definitely permeated American culture. Not quite so much in Canadian, but in American culture, absolutely. It's hard to escape.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's I don't have hard figures on this, but I believe we're still in the range of 3 out of 4 Americans identifying as Christian, and a great percentage of them identifying as evangelical, which is not
Yeah.
necessarily reflective of extremist hardcore. Not all evangelicals fit that bill, but you're moving in that direction when you start talking on the spectrum of intensity of belief, and thereby on that intensity scale, sort of the intensity of the behavior that results from that belief, you know.
Happily, though, one of the fastest growing groups in that demographic is the nuns. It's the rise of the
Yeah.
nuns as more and more people are coming to their senses and recognizing, okay, I actually don't want to be a part of this. This isn't working for me anymore, or, it isn't true. So,
Right.
yeah, that group is growing.
Exactly. And we're not talking about the nuns, the Catholic nuns in habits, the penguin outfits, right? We're talking about None, nuns. I have no religious beliefs, or spiritual, not religious, as part of this camp. And I think that's
Mhm.
really, if we break it down from what I've seen, that's the part that's growing more so than the absolute nuns. The absolute anti-theists are not really what's on the rise, but a decline for sure in belief sets that are connected with organized religions. People are moving away from structured, organized faiths.
Yes, and I have been poking around asking some interesting questions on Facebook and Twitter about people's journey when they have decided to, as I say, divorce religion, when they've decided to leave religion. Um, Lots of them don't become atheists. Many of them start exploring New Age and
Mhm.
Eastern religions. That is extremely, extremely common. They feel like it's a way for them to still maintain a sense of spirituality or connection to some kind of God or maker or creator or whatever. But actually, then a lot of them do poke around, hang around in there for a while, and then also make their way out of that. So it's a very individual journey, but there are definitely a lot of similarities that people go through.
Yeah, for sure. Do they tend to, in your conversations with them, do they tend to be cognizant or aware of the fact that that there's still a personal spirit, like yeah, I guess it's spiritual, or there's still some personal journey that they're looking for something. There are still emotional needs there that are trying to be fulfilled. I only bring this up because there are many in that I've spoken with, or where I should say a few people I've spoken with anecdotally over the years who, go zero, from 100 to 0. They leave their religion and then it's nothing. They're just nope, nope. I'm fine. I got nothing. I have no more needs. I don't need the church. I don't need the spiritual community. I don't need the sociality. I'm fine. And I've always kind of wondered at that, because it strikes me common sense wise that instinctively I feel that would be the minority of people, that most people would still have emotional needs of some kind that they're trying to fulfill. What's your experience with that?
There's a tremendous amount of grief that goes along with divorcing religion or walking away from cherished beliefs. I mean, I was born into a Pentecostal household, and then I became even much more fundamentalist when I married and had children. And I wore a head covering, and I didn't have TV, didn't wear makeup, didn't even wear my wedding ring. Was entirely consumed with trying to live a very holy, life and to raise my daughters accordingly. So I became more and more distant from the rest of society. And it was completely my identity. I was a fundamentalist Christian homeschooling wife and mother. That was who I was. And so when I stepped away from religion, other aspects of that also began to dissolve. It's like pulling on that string on the sweater, and it just unravels. And it was very painful. And I didn't know anyone else who was going through what I was going through. I didn't know anyone else who had been as committed in their beliefs as I was. So it was a painful time walking away from that. And there was a lot of grief. So it took me years to get to the point that I could say I was not a Christian, and then more years after that to move from agnostic to what I now consider as an agnostic atheist or just plain atheist. But it was not a fast transition, and I had to do a lot of introspective work.
Interesting. And I think that is probably a lot more of the common experience that people have. You know, is that I kind of did go 100 to 0, but then I bounced. So there was a little boing, you know, a little bit to it over time as I, you know, kind of. Well, when you find out in a very short period of time the real stark, harsh realities of the cult you've been part of, right? Me and you know the L. Ron Hubbard and all the lies and deceit and all that, and the intense level of commitment. I mean, the monk level of commitment I had as a Sea Org member, full time, 24/7. This is what I do. To bounce out of that, and then within a couple months, learn all the truth about it. You know, there was a very you know, I don't think it's a surprise or anything too weird that I had such a bounce out of that Scientology headspace into, okay, there's nothing. But it was really, actually, as I think about it, though, more, I think maybe it was more of a, not that there is asserting that there is nothing, but just an absolute, I don't know. I don't know. And maybe I'll spend the rest of my life trying to find out. You know,
Yeah.
how about that as a response to popping out of these religious headspaces? Do you
I
ever?
love that. I think that's just fantastic. It's always better to be in a state of I don't know, because it's much closer to the truth. I don't know. I have a lot of ideas about things, but there are some things not only do I not know, but actually nobody else knows either, even though they like to pretend they know.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's a healthy state to be in. The danger, of course, that we run into, which I think you are maybe alluding to, is that we can leave our fundamentalist group behind, but we can still take fundamentalism with us wherever we go. So if we become New Age, we can become like totally diehard New Age. This is the only way, or whatever else it is. It can happen in the spheres of politics, nutrition, ecology. Because we are human, we are prone to extremes. That's just the way it goes. I feel like my life is spent constantly searching for the middle. And damn it, sometimes it is hard to find the middle. And sometimes I don't want to be in the middle because it feels more familiar to be in extreme territory. And so it also involves recognizing what aspects of your belief system were kind of really tied in with your personality as well, because my personality tends to be extreme. And I was raised by quite a volatile religious narcissist. And so we had to become familiar with rules in our home, lots of rules. So guess what? I became comfortable with rules and I gravitated towards rules.
There we go. Exactly. The personality thing, I wanted to jump on that because I completely agree with you. I think that I think there's probably lots of different systems. I mean, I know we got, you know, Jungian and all that. I'm just getting into this stuff, and I'm kind of really enjoying learning certain aspects of this that I've known about or sort of known the existence of, or have read a little bit about in some cases, read a lot about in other cases. But the stuff I'm talking about is the new stuff I'm learning. is very exciting to learn about. And one of those things is that there are different models of personality types and ways of looking at how people are and why they act the way they do. That's the question I always come back to. How come people act the way they do? Why do
Yeah,
people think the way they
it's
do?
fascinating.
Yeah, those are the two questions that I am always on about in my own mind as I'm thinking about thinking and I'm thinking about why people behave the way they do, Um, and I think this personality thing is a thing, and I wanted to add, the reason I'm kind of highlighting this is I wanted to ask you in terms of counseling, when you see, when people come out of a high control group or a cult or or an extreme religious group, let's say, where trauma has occurred. And this is why I connect those dots. I'm not trying to say all religion is traumatic, but you're seeing people who have had traumatic religious experiences. So that's why we're talking about this. So in these cases, religious, extremist religious folks are often known to other people by their anger, their determination, their certainty, their their and the moral certitude and all that. How much of that do you see carry over after they leave those groups? That they are just part of that personality package where they've lost, okay, I don't believe in Jesus anymore, but they're still just as they were when they were part of the religious group, and do they even recognize that that could be a problem or should be something they should be dealing with?
I won't say that a lot of those folks find their way to me. If they still have a real attitude of certainty or whatever, they probably are like, "Oh, I'm fine. I don't need any help." Anyways, I do sometimes think that our younger generation that has totally grown up on social media, um, they have a different view of things, especially we're somewhat older, we're more mature, let's say. We've had more experiences in life. And the first half of our life, my life, I won't speak for you, I know you're a young man. First half of my life was definitely lived without internet at all or social
Right.
media at all. And
Yep.
so I can tend to back off people, give the benefit of the doubt, allow lots of room. But some folks who've come out of, say, maybe they've left a fundamentalist religion, um, and they don't like something that you've said, so they're busy policing you. They're watching what you type on Twitter or listening to what you say, and then they believe it's their duty to come after you with guns ablazing to hold you accountable, which is that's a very religious mindset, and it's a real, sometimes an air of superiority, self-righteousness, whatever phrase you want to use for it, but they will use that social media, they'll wield it like a club to try and beat you into submission until you say, okay, I'll only do it your way. So how is that different from being in a fundamentalist group or cult? I don't know, because that's what it's like in a fundamentalist group or cult. It's their way or the highway.
That's right. That's exactly right. And we also see this kind of behavior, of course, outside of religion. I mean, this is, or we talk about it even when we see it in pseudo-religious ways. I mean, I've done whole podcasts about, are the extreme SJW types, and when you get over to that end of the spectrum, is that almost a religion? You know what I mean? With the way and it's that kind of attitude you were just expressing
Yeah.
that makes people think that because they connect those. They go, wow, who else is like that? Oh, these guys, these really hardcore religious guys are just like that. So,
Yeah. It's the rigidity
yeah,
and the authoritarianism. Yeah, it's very unbecoming. And it doesn't really make people want to stick around.
exactly. And that's the thing that upsets me about it is they will take offense at you having a negative reaction to that. and assume that you're having a negative reaction to the subject matter that they're talking about, rather than the fact, no, it's actually your manners, your mannerisms, your lack of etiquette, your lack of empathy, compassion, whatever, for people who don't think like you do. Is
Right.
really at the end of the day, and we can apply this on the left, the right, politically, but religion doesn't really, in and of itself, it's not a political thing. And, we can think about this outside of political paradigms, I think.
Right. And again, it makes me think of the degree of attachment that we have to any ideology. So it doesn't have to be religious at all. It can be nutritional, politics, whatever. But when we are holding on to it so tightly that it absolutely defines us, then there's no room for anyone else in our life. There's no room for anyone who doesn't think exactly the way that we think. And of course, one of the problems when people go after someone else and they're just going to like cut them off completely because they don't like that they used a certain word or something like this, then that other person is not given the opportunity actually to step back and pontificate a little bit and consider the actions that they did. And maybe they actually would come to a point of saying, yeah, you know what? But it's sure not going to happen in a moment when someone is just like this in their face. We need some breathing space to step back and actually take some time to be introspective about things.
Yeah, exactly. How do you, as a counselor, approach people who, or your clients? You have people who are seeing you, and they have, I guess, whatever it is they're aware of that they're trying to deal with, and then you observe or see these kind of unthinking, thought-stopping cliches, or their cognitive dissonance just goes to the simplest, stupidest conclusions, and that's it. God damn it, that's all there is. How do you help people unhinge from that? And can you do it even if they're not? Do you try to do it in a subtle way, or do you just flat out go, I think there might be something we might want to look at, or how do you approach this?
It's it's in my nature when dealing with other people to be as gentle as possible, and to use a lot of self-deprecating humor. And I know that's exactly the way you operate too, because I've heard you many times. And that way, people feel safe to open up and to maybe do some exploring. So I really take a very gentle approach with it, and just ask them questions like, maybe if they're, how can I get them to look at it from another point of view that's not so threatening?
Yeah.
The old thing of, well, what would you tell your best friend if they were in this situation? Oh, well, I'd tell them to. And then it's like, really? Well, consider that then.
Exactly. That's a very good point. Even just getting a little role reversal, a little external point of view. Those are good tactics. Because I'm wondering, people listen to this and they have friends and family that they, might run into who, could be falling into an extremist headspace, could be in one, or could be coming out of one. We have these three stages, and all of them could use some assistance. How do you advise people, assist folks in that way? I mean, because sometimes you got to do it covertly a little bit. You know what I mean? You can't just be, hey, you're being an asshole, right? You can't just like be open like that much to somebody that way. But how do you help
Yeah.
them out,
If you're on the outside, if it's your loved one who seems to be succumbing to extremist thinking, I still would say the same tactic: being gentle, being kind, being respectful. Ask questions. Ask questions. Oh, what is it exactly that makes you think this is such a good group, or what's so appealing to you about this group? Help me understand. And then that way they don't have their defenses up like that. They're more likely, they'll still be cautious, but if you're being respectful about it, they may still open up to you. Now, as they keep going and fall deeper and farther into it, which happens a lot of times, then I would recommend to those people who are losing loved ones to it, they need to exercise self-care, because it's painful to watch. And right now, I know in America particularly, families are being split apart by a lot of things that are going on right now. But if you can at all be able to maintain an opening for dialogue, then my hope is once the person does realize that they've been duped, that they will at least know that you're a safe person that they can talk to. But that's a tricky fine line, because sometimes self-care and self-protection means that for a time you have to step away from those people, or you have to put up boundaries that are difficult and painful.
That's true. That's very true. I don't talk about self-care a lot. I think the reason why is because of my background, actually.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think so. I think so because I mean, I've certainly talked about how I have recovered from the Scientology attitude of work, 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 and all that. I mean, I've talked about my self-care, but I don't talk about it in terms of, advice to other people about, hey, you got to make sure I mean, it is self-care is the most important care. It is the best care, but it's but you got this mission, you got to help these people.
It's that old oxygen mask, falling in the airplane, and you have to put it on yourself first before you put it on your child. And if you have nothing left to give, then you have nothing left to give. So we must take care of ourselves.
Good point. Very good point. Hey, everyone. No matter what stage of life we're in, there's never been a better time to continue learning. I've certainly found that true with my university experience, and believe it or not, I'm actually taking advantage of the Great Courses Plus app as part of that. I'm studying statistics and found one of the best courses for that topic on this streaming educational platform. And that's what the Great Courses Plus is all about. They have thousands of engaging lectures from top professors and experts. So in addition to statistics, I wanted to let you know about the featured course for this month, The Art of Conflict Management, Achieving Solutions for Life, Work, and Beyond. It may not be obvious, but the fact is that conflict can be extraordinarily useful in building deeper and stronger relationships, whether with your coworkers or your closest friends and loved ones, but only if you have the skills needed to identify and resolve it. That's where I think we could all use some help. The Great Courses Plus offers unlimited learning at a time when we need it most. Without the added pressures of homework or grades, just in-depth learning at your own pace. And it's available anywhere you are, on your phone or tablet or laptop. Join me and sign up for the Great Courses Plus today. Right now, Sensibly Speaking listeners get a free trial of unlimited access. That's access to any and all courses completely free. Don't wait any longer. Sign up today using my special URL, thegreatcoursesplus.com/critical. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/critical. Sign up today. I wanted to circle back on certainty for a second because this came up a second ago, and I think this is such an important point. And it speaks to, of course, how I think an attitude that is practical and necessary, I believe, in dealing with people who are in extremist headspaces or trying to help people recover from extremist headspaces, and that is an attitude about certainty. Scientology, puts itself out there as the science of certainty. Hubbard glommed onto this button real early on, and it's a powerful, much more than I appreciated until a couple of years ago. It's a very, very powerful button for people, what they are sure of, what they know to be true and beyond question. And everybody's got their things. I mean, there isn't anything, we're all certain of some things, but some people are certain of things that maybe they shouldn't be. And so I'm not going to say all certainty is bad, but what would you say about this?
Certainty, security, and order are the big three. That is what humans crave. We want it from the time we're little to the time we die. Certainty, security, and order. And this is
I'm
actually
writing
what can
that.
allow us, oh good, take notes. This can actually allow us to be manipulated. This desire, this need, this compulsion that we have to, we want to be sure about things. And that's how strong men like your president, the guy who yells the loudest and promises law and order and stuff, directly appeals to the fear that people have when they stop to think about actually how random things are, because things are very random. And it's a tall order to be comfortable with the randomness that is the human existence. So we do crave certainty, security, and order, and we need to be aware that that craving can leave us vulnerable.
Yes, exactly. I think that I think it's healthy and necessary to mental health of any kind that we be certain of certain things. Our name, all right, our who we are, right? Our general location in the world. If we are in love with someone, I think that's something that after time, over time, you can become fairly certain of who your family is. I think that's something you can be relatively, it's never going to change. Your family is always going to be your family, right? So these are things that are not in flux. And that's about where I draw the line. Because
and I would say even with those things, even though we want to be certain about those things, I'm divorced. My family did change. Who I am, that changed. My identity changed when I left religion. And I got divorced partly also as a result of leaving religion. And my partner, my former husband, was a minister. So things that I was deeply certain of changed. And I didn't want them to change, and I didn't try and make them change, but they changed. And then then becomes a time of tremendous opportunity. I mean, I've heard it said that the Chinese characters for crisis and opportunity are the same characters, the same figures. And if you think about it, that is true. With every crisis comes opportunity. And it's when we divorce religion or have any kind of huge unwanted shift in our life, we have this opportunity to rebuild.
that's a really good point and an interesting one because leaving religion or recovering from a religion, traumatic experiences there, certainly would be described, I think, by anybody who's experiencing it as a crisis.
Absolutely.
Personal one.
Extremely disorienting. And the tricky part is, so you're grieving, you have these massive losses, the hits keep coming, but you still have to go to work every day. It's not like if your partner dies or your child or someone you love, you do get some time off. People recognize you're grieving. Even if you say, I lost my dog or whatever, people are extremely sympathetic. But if you say, I'm having an existential crisis, like I don't believe my religion anymore, people are like, well, it's about freaking time, and they just think it's the same as stopping believing in Santa Claus, which actually is very offensive and hurtful because it is so much more than that. My entire identity revolved around my faith. It informed the way I dressed and the way I spoke and the way I lived my life. So it was a huge, huge loss.
That's right. I think anybody who says just to poke fun, I think anybody who says that it's this should be easy, like giving up Santa Claus, I think they kind of forgot what it was like for them as a 5 or 6 year old when they learned that Santa Claus ain't real. I'm pretty sure that was something that I had to chew on for quite a while as a kid to get my head around. That was a new reality, and I was not particularly happy or comfortable when they told me about that.
Yeah, and actually, that's something parents might want to think about. If you if you always want your child to know that you are telling them the truth and that they can trust you, be careful of the things that you present to them as being the truth.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, don't even get me started on the whole religious education and child abuse thing. God, I can go on a roll on that. Okay, so, but like I said, I'm really trying to not make this like some kind of anti-religious thing here because religion is necessary and useful in many, many places in people's lives. And I'm not going to say it's not, but the trauma is not necessary, not useful, and not needed, and neither is the abuse. Let's talk a little about you because we've been talking about professional stuff here. So you've mentioned a few times here that you've had your background with this. What is that? What happened with you?
Right. So I grew up, I'm Canadian, so I grew up in Canada in a Pentecostal home. So speaking in tongues and that sort of thing was like normal for me and for my family. My siblings, I'm the youngest of four. My siblings all walked away from the faith in their teen years. And as the youngest, I saw how much that hurt my parents. And I was determined I would never hurt my parents the way that they did. So when I became a teen, I really dug in deeper and just became very enmeshed. I would say at that point, that's really when it also, the identity and the beliefs meshed together. And part of it was being raised in a home with a narcissistic parent. You want their love, but you can't get it. It's never actually attainable. So I was always trying, am I holy enough? Am I good enough? Well, now I can actually speak in tongues. Now I'm this, now I'm that. And then grew up and married a man who was a good man, a good person, very religious, of course. And then he went to Bible college, and it was while we were at this very conservative Bible college in Alberta. I started noticing these ladies in the grocery store, and they always had their head coverings on. And I thought, what is that? What is that? And I talked to my husband about it. He said, oh, it's somewhere in the Bible. It's in the New Testament somewhere. And so I started researching, and I decided, yeah, you know what? We were never set free from this obligation where we're told that women should have their heads covered and dress modestly and all this stuff. I was really, truly trying to be a good Christian, and I wanted so to be a good wife and mother. And so I asked him if he would mind if I adopted that way of dressing. And he said, no, that would be fine. And I was certainly the only one on the campus and the only one who didn't belong to this closed group of Mennonites. And so then the Mennonites started seeking me out because they thought it was so interesting and invited me to their church. And church with them was very different. They didn't have any musical instruments, and the men and women sat segregated. And I felt it was so beautiful. It felt so holy. And guess what? More rules. There were more rules that I could follow. So I was,
I wanted to ask because that's, it's not been super clear in my head, and this is my bad. I guess I could Google this, but you did it. So I'm going to ask you. Mennonites, Amish, I've had these two things confused for a while. What's the difference?
I think Amish would be like Mennonites on steroids. Like the Mennonites follow Menno Simons. I don't know if the Amish do, but it's definitely the idea of you're turning your back on the world. But the Mennonite group that I fell in with, the Haldeman Mennonites or the Church of God in Christ, they would still have like a microwave, and they drove cars, but they would all rip the stereo out of their car to show how holy they were. Like, you better not be keeping that stereo in the car. And the women, they all wore long skirts and dresses, long dresses, and they could have flowers on them, but there were rules about the size of the flowers or the pattern. So you could have something, you couldn't have anything like as big as a loonie or a toonie, that's Canadian coins, and you certainly couldn't have anything as small as a dime. But you could have in between those. Otherwise, it was too gaudy. Like, people would be trying to pay attention to you. So there were all these extra rules, which I really enjoyed. And then my husband became a pastor, and so we did move away to another province. And while we were there, he said, people think you're weird wearing your head covering. I want you to stop wearing your head covering. It's creating a barrier in the congregation. And I was very upset by that. Because I felt I was sacrificing by wearing a covering. And that year turned out to just be a terrible year of just lots and lots of tragedies, unfortunately, befell our family. And then it ended with our youngest daughter receiving a life-threatening diagnosis. And then we couldn't actually pay for all the medical help she needed, even though we're in Canada. And so then we went bankrupt on top of everything else. And it was at that point, and my nephew went to prison for murder. Like, it was a terrible couple of years, and there was no breathing space in between. It was just bang, 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 a total shitstorm raining down on us. And then finally I thought, this cannot be right. I have tried my best to live as holy of a life as anybody I know. And this is how I'm rewarded. And then the people in the church weren't, I didn't feel that we were receiving a lot of support when our child was, like, we were facing a terrible crisis. And so, yeah, that allowed me to start really thinking I might look elsewhere. And it took a lot of courage. I was terrified. I remember walking across the street to the bookstore, the used bookstore, and I went by myself, and they had this corner in the back, and it was covered with a curtain, and it said occult and alternative religious books. Like, this is in the early 2000s, late 90s. I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go back there. And I pull open the curtain. I'm waiting for the lightning to strike, and there wasn't lightning. And I just took my time. My heart was pounding, and I found a book that seemed like not terrifying. It was going to be comparing and contrasting religion and Buddhism, Christianity and Buddhism and Islam. So I take the book to the counter and truly ask the lady to put it in a brown paper bag, because I did not want anyone seeing. I didn't want my kids to see it. And I went home and I stuck it in my underwear drawer, because I knew even God would not look in my underwear drawer. And it took me probably another week to get comfortable with the idea. That book was in my house, was in my dresser, and I was going to start reading that book. So when no one else was around, I would start reading it. But that's how great my fear and concern was. And yet I felt I had to do it. I had to be setting myself free. I had bit on the wrong horse somehow. And then I started discovering some New Age books and teaching, and then I really dove to that and grew my dreadlocks and got Om tattoos and went to yoga, and I could adjust your chakras, just
really out of bounds. What did your family think of all this?
My kids were relieved. They decided new mom was a lot more fun than.
How old were your kids at this point?
I think 10 and 12. But
they
but
would
it
have
didn't.
loved this.
It wasn't overnight. Like, it was still a process. But yeah, I definitely started easing up on a lot of things, and then eventually I did have to talk to them about it, because I couldn't, just couldn't keep it secret. And the marriage also, unfortunately, was unraveling at that point. So there were a lot of stressors that were going on. And I mean, thankfully,
must have been a point of no return. I mean, wow, that's quite different.
Oh yeah. And my ex-husband, the father of my kids, he's just a great guy. He's a really good person, and he has also extricated himself also from the belief system, and we've been able to build such a lovely friendship now that we're not married and don't have these expectations and demands on each other. He is the first one I call when something goes wrong or something goes right. It's a really nice relationship to have, and he feels the same.
That's great. I mean, it's also so rare.
Yeah.
I mean, comparatively, which is good though. I mean, that's actually really that's great. Any Since we're on the topic and since we are talking about, those recovery and stuff, how'd you do that?
Mm.
Because I imagine there was quite a bit of acrimony when this was all going on.
I think we were numb because it had been already a year or two of all these different tragedies
Mm,
happening, and his ministry fell apart. Like, just, it was, so he was in a depression. I was in a depression. There was a lot going on, but we were never unkind to each other. We have extremely different, the reason we actually married was because of religion. That was our commonality. So when I didn't believe anymore, that made it tricky to stay together. And then there were other things too. Like, I realized I had been so trapped in that way of thinking my whole life. There was exploring that I wanted to do. I wanted to explore who I was sexually. And that's another thing I told you. When people leave, if they leave evangelicalism, a lot of times then they'll go into new age stuff, exploring Eastern religions, but also for many of them, there comes a profound time of exploring sexuality, their own sexuality, monogamy versus polyamory, like all these different things. So my hope is that I can potentially at least have them really thinking about these instead of just, I'm a teenager again, I can do all these things. Because I did do all those things. I tried. There's like nothing I didn't try, basically. So if I can help people be thoughtful and have some idea about what might be coming next, or other things, that issues that might be presenting themselves, then we can maybe mitigate some damage, but still allow people to fully explore who they are and who they want to be.
yeah, exactly. That's so funny. There's so many things you've said here that I mean directly can relate to my own experience with this stuff. I mean, and I don't know that I've ever said this out loud, but okay, folks, big deep dark secret about Chris. Yeah, for a few months, I was actually totally checking out the poly scene. I was like, what's all this about? Very, very similar. This is a couple of years after I had gotten out of Scientology, but, trying to play the field, trying to figure things out, trying to exactly like you're talking about here, and on the
I think,
advice of others,
yep,
because I had
yep.
been very relationship committed as a Scientologist. It had always been, well, this was only going to be in a relationship that we were going to be intimate, et cetera, et cetera. And not necessarily that I had to get married. Of course, in the Sea Org, I did. But even coming out, I wasn't interested in one night stands and all that. And then I had friends going, "Oh no, dude, you need to, you need to live a little right now. That's what you need to be doing." And I took him up on that advice, and I, was looking here, looking there, looking everywhere else, and then of course finally found, my current wife, and couldn't be happier. And that was kind of it on the whole poly thing and all of that, because it was okay. Now I've got this, but that was only after.
Yeah.
Kind of doing this whole exploratory thing and
Right.
really honestly looking at, what do I want? What do I not want?
Yeah.
How do I
Well,
know if I want this if I haven't even, not necessarily fully tried it, but if I don't even contemplate the idea, if I have all these walls up around me, then
yeah, I know. How do you know peppermint's your favorite flavor if you've only ever had vanilla? Yeah, and I'm a huge proponent of de-shamifying sex. And a lot of folks who come to me have grown up, unfortunately, under purity culture. And so they have been told that it's a sin to masturbate, it's a sin to have sex outside of marriage, it's a sin to think about sex. Um, and so there can be almost like a disconnect between their actual body and their mind, the way they think about sex or sexual pleasure. And so it's a time of exploration and learning and starting over. And like I say, de-shamifying. I want people to talk about sex. I want people to be able to explore sex in a safe way and learn about consent. What does consent mean? Because when you're a fundamentalist, your body actually isn't your own. Your parents, I mean, if you're a female, there's nothing more important than your womb and your vagina. And if you're a male, you're not allowed to be gratifying yourself at all sexually. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Sea Org as well. Yeah, same things, same values.
Yeah, it's
You know,
fundamentalism.
I was going to say, I'm really glad you did not run across a copy of Dianetics in your new age. I was like, of all the things to not get wrangled into, thank God that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Boy. So, okay. So now having, lived the life that you led and now doing religious trauma counseling and helping people through this. And of course, being, you've mentioned that you atheist, agnostic atheist. I think we're probably on the same page or similar pages on that, because really the answer is I don't know. It's not a yes, no sort of question. Do you have any other views about religion or comments on organized religion? And let's be clear, we're talking about organized religion now, not religious belief or religious practice, but groups, organizations, rules, etc. What are your views on that? Are they negative because of the work that you do, or are you able to obtain sort of keep an objective view about it, or how do you look at that stuff?
I pretty much have nothing good to say about religion because I feel like it hijacks people. It hijacks their ability to think for themselves. I don't feel like, so now I would also call myself a humanist, secular humanist. That's how I prefer to be identified. I am capable of making my own decisions. Yeah, I don't need anyone's religion to tell me what is right and what is wrong. I know that if I'm doing an action and it's hurting somebody, there's a good chance it's wrong. Otherwise, I'm free to behave as I see fit if I'm not hurting myself and not hurting other people.
Sure. But what about with other people? I mean,
So,
that's awesome for, I agree with you. Because I lead my life from a very similar point of view in terms of religion, and I am the first to say I am not unbiased on the topic. I have a whole lot of negative things to say about organized religion. I differentiate that from religious belief and religious practice for a reason, because the word religion gets a little confusing to people because they conflate these three things, right? So what about religious belief on the part of others? Do you think it can be helpful in any way?
the only way that I can see it or have experienced it really as being helpful is people who have how can I say this? I do not want to be offending people. Sometimes people, when they are dealing with drug and alcohol addiction, you'll find a lot of churches host 12-step groups.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people end up just swapping their addiction from the substance to the religion.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, some folks have been so terribly traumatized in their own growing up years with nothing to do with religion. They've had abusive parents or whatever, and they can have real mental health struggles, and they will grasp at religion, and it can become very important to them. And some of them, it's actually the only thing keeping them from killing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't talk to people who are happy in their religion and try and convince them out of it. I would never do that because it was very painful for me when I divorced religion. It was painful. I don't want other people to have to go through that kind of pain. people have to do things on their own timing when they're ready to do them. So if they're all inside the church, I'm going to let them be happy in the church. I'm outside the church. I got my hands underneath to catch the ones that fall through there's a hole under the welcome mat or whatever. You're not allowed in the church anymore because you're gay, or we don't like this or that about you, or you're just having so many doubts you can't keep going anymore. Those are the people who are going to come and find me. I'm not interested in robbing anyone of their faith or destroying their faith.
Good point. I thought that was a really good point you made about the transference of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I noted it because that was actually the area where it first dawned on me in my anti-religion stance years ago, right? It bounced out of Scientology, fuck religion. Where I started considering, wait a second, there's something going on here that is real, that is very raw, very emotional for the person, and that I can't just go in and say, oh, well, that's just stupid. You just shouldn't have that belief. I'm talking about addicts now. I'm talking about 12-step guys. I'm talking about drugs. I'm talking about criminals, people in prison who catch Jesus, right? Or Islam, for that matter, or anything else. When they glom onto or take hold of or accept, or however, there's lots of words we could use for this, but when they accept or take on this belief set and practice and start, making this part of their life, then you see positive social behavioral changes. They're not drinking so much anymore. They're not doing the coke anymore. They're out of prison and they're not leading the criminal life because Jesus says not to.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to acknowledge that for what it is and not try to lay my own conscious projection onto that. Well, I wouldn't have to do that.
Right.
So therefore, they shouldn't have to do that, right? And it was
Right.
only when I realized for myself, quite certainly, oh, wow, that's what's happening when I see, atheists, for example, make the argument all the time, well, I can be moral without God, good without God, right? Great. That's great for you. But they, unfortunately, I think unfairly extend that or project that out to everybody. And in the case of these criminals or recovering addicts or people who are in those situations, when you see positive social behavioral changes as a direct result of that religious conversion, I have to step back and go, I ain't touching that. I'm not going to.
I'd certainly rather have somebody sitting in a pew than out murdering or abusing another person. However, I feel like this is an area where humanists have dropped the ball or just not been able to catch up yet. If that same person who's struggling with addiction could actually see their own worth and how much better their life could be, that has nothing to do with Jesus or God or anything. You as a human being, you have worth and dignity and value. You are worthy of a life that is meaningful and joyful. Is smoking whatever you're smoking or drinking whatever you're drinking, is that in alignment with that? Are you actually getting the most you can out of life? Because you're capable of doing it. I frankly never send people to 12-step programs. I always encourage people to look into smart recovery. And so if there's any of your viewers or listeners, they can look it up, smartrecovery.org. And it is not a 12-step based program.
Cool. Yeah, I was because when you said the thing about transferring addiction, I thought to myself, oh, that's a good point, because maybe that's what actually is going on there. But I had to bring it up because I want to temper that against the positive social behavior as an outcome.
Well, and there's questions too that like a therapist might ask to determine if someone has an addiction or to something. And actually you have to change very little in those questions to determine if a person is struggling with a religious addiction. The big problem with religion and people becoming religious and adopting it is that, so yeah, they then have a great social and supportive community circle inside the walls of that church, or inside only people who believe that way. It's suddenly us and them. And the people that have the most value are the people who believe what you believe. You know, you might give so many chances to an outsider, or your life becomes about trying to witness to them. You have to bring them into the fold. You can't just have a relationship with someone because they're a decent human being. There's always an agenda.
Yeah,
That's the big problem I have with
those,
religion.
yeah, that's for sure. No argument here. I mean, here, you know, and I think you're right in terms of drop balls, humanists, whatever, because humanist is the only label I have ever had, ever in my whole life. As I sit here right now, it's the only one I like that I'm proud to have. I am a humanist. Yes, that is what I am. Right? I got no qualms about saying that. You know, atheists are the bottom rung of the dung of the catfish of the bottom dwelling, scum sucking lowlife. You know, people think more highly of terrorists than they do atheists in America by survey in some areas. So, you know, you kind of, gee, I don't know if I can say that one, but humanist, yes, okay, good. We'll go.
Well, and yet, you know, for people, I can only speak for Christians because that's what I was. Calling someone a humanist, and particularly a secular humanist, is a tremendous slur. It's a bad name that you're calling someone. So for me to be able to publicly, happily declare myself a secular humanist, that's interesting.
Yeah, great change there. Great change. Well, and me too. I mean, as a former Scientologist, you know, I mean, it was my way or the highway, baby. This is how it is. L. Ron Hubbard's got the truth.
Oh,
you, and you need to get some of it.
Well, and the funny thing is, it's everyone is fine in their own group, but they'll look at your group and go, "Well, those people are nuts. They're just freaking nuts." And of course, you're in your group looking at them, going, "Well, I'm the only one with the truth." So you know, those people don't have a clue. Ugh.
Exactly. It's just exhausting. But that is exactly the kind of certainty that we were talking about earlier. That's the kind that we could do without, you know, because it doesn't help. It just doesn't help. It doesn't help you, it doesn't help the people around you, you
I
know.
would much rather spend time in the company of someone who is curious than someone who is certain. And there's such a welcoming thing about curiosity and being with someone who is curious, because I'm not worried they're going to be beating me over the head with, you know, whatever they're certain about. Instead, maybe they have room for me to ask my questions too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, here's one last thing I am curious about, and then maybe we'll move toward wrapping up. This has been an interesting talk. I wanted to ask, though, about getting firmly back onto this religious trauma counseling and recovery from that. So you've been doing this for a while, treated a lot of people, dealt with a lot of people. What kind of advice could you give to anyone out there, believer or not? You know, just humanist advice, I suppose, in terms of how to either avoid or deal with, you know, extremist situations, or, you know, like this religious trauma, specifically religious trauma. Let's just quantify it that way. How should people deal with that when they run into it with friends or family?
When we're firmly entrenched in our ideology, okay, and so we have a really strong attachment to our belief, um, it's very hard to love people outside of that, or to accept people who are not part of that. So if you find that if you're following an ideology that doesn't allow you to love someone else simply because they're not part of your group, that's an indication that you then potentially have fallen into extremist thinking, or in with an extremist group. Pardon me. And again, for people who are on the other side of it, um, just the best bet is to try and keep those doors of communication open as long as they can. as well as they can. I found for myself, but also for some clients that I've worked with, we start to put like even our ability to love ourselves also is in jeopardy. Once we leave the religion, then we think, well, now I'm not even worth being loved. So this is something that people need to think about. You are worthy of being loved, whoever you are. I want you to love yourself. And if you're struggling with that, I want you to see a therapist because it's serious. Wow. Conditions for self-love. That's it. Conditions. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Well, thank you for that. I think that is very, very good advice. I especially the self-love part. Because we have a real problem with that. You know, it's funny, Americans, you know, I know we're viewed as very egotistical. And it's not a completely unwarranted point of view. And yet at the same time, so much of it is bluster on our parts because there is so much self-doubt, even self-loathing in this country. And it's a real divide because you have people who are well, you just got a lot of different people here. That's all I can say about it, actually. But they have this, you know, we fight about this stuff, this identity stuff, and unfortunately, religion ends up playing a fairly significant role in it here in the States, around the world, you know, and we've got to deal with this better. Whether is it going to go away tomorrow? No. Is religion going to go away in 100 years? No, it's not. And anybody who's got some fantasy that it is, it's not. So it's just, it's not in our nature to not think that way. And as long as we're human, that's how things are going to be. So we're going to have to figure out how to get along with each other. Both the believers and the non-believers, you know?
Yes, I feel like there definitely is some hope and some movement in that direction. When I look at my daughter's generation, so they're 22 and 24. I cannot believe I have kids that old. But they are so much more accepting of people who are different than they are. Then I think people were, even in my generation, let alone my parents' generation. So I do have some hope and encouragement from this young and up and coming generation.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's I definitely am not that generation anymore. It's funny the difference that you notice as you get older and you start like not caring so much who the hot pop singers are. You don't really care anymore about like I go through my news feed and I'm just like, yeah, I don't know who that person is breaking up with that other person. I have no idea what that's about.
It's the worst when you go to the emergency department and all the doctors look so young and you're like, can I please have a doctor with some experience? Because I'm sure you're only 20. Like,
right.
Oh, fun times.
Exactly. Good times. Well, Janice, how do people contact you? I'll put links in our show notes here to your website. Is there any other preferred mode of contact if people want to reach out to you?
Sure, they can find me on Twitter. I'm at Divorce Religion, all one word. And I'm also at wise_counselor. Counselor has 2 L's. That's the Canadian way to spell it, at wise_counselor. And I have just finished putting up a new website. So it's divorcingreligion.com. And there is a hyphen in between divorcing and religion. And you can see some of the things that I have to offer there. I'm really interested in offering support groups for people who have come out of fundamentalist backgrounds. And so I've got a support group for women who've left, men who've left, LGBTQ plus community, ex-clergy. I really want to get the word out there. And the website is brand new. And so they can reach me on that website as well.
Beautiful. Excellent. Well, folks, check it out. And if you're, you want some help in that area, I think Janice is exactly the kind of person you're looking for because you need compassion, understanding, and That's what you need. And that's what she's got in abundance.
If I may, I'd like to recommend a book that was so helpful for me, and I'm sure you and a lot of your readers have heard of it. It's called Leaving the Fold, and it's by Dr. Marlene Winnell. And she is a friend and a mentor to me, and she is someone who helped to change my life.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, we'll get links to this stuff, like I said, in the show notes here. So, Janice, thank you very much for taking the time to be on my show. I really do appreciate it.
It was so much fun. Let's do it again.
I am sure we will. I am sure we will. There's a lot, there's still a ton of stuff we have not gone over here at all that I could ask you about, and various specific details about dealing with religious trauma, and also specific types of religious trauma, because your Christians might be a little bit different from your Catholics, might be a little bit different from your Islam, etc. From all of that. So anyway, from Scientology. So good times. All right, folks. Any questions, comments, feedback? Go ahead and leave it in the comment section on YouTube, and or at sensiblyspeaking.com. And of course, if you are enjoying the show, enjoying the channel, and what I'm putting out here, and you find it entertaining, informative, and educational, then please consider supporting this show through Patreon. All right, guys. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.